Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's virtual education program at Cancer Support Community South Bay. I'm Rebecca, the program manager, and I welcome you to this workshop titled Integrating the Five Pillars of Health. Today we'll be talking about mental health. Before we begin, if this is your first time joining us, CNC South Bay's mission is to ensure that all people impacted by cancer are empowered by knowledge, strengthened by action, and sustained by communities so that no one faces cancer alone. We serve the South Bay, Long Beach, and Orange County area all at no cost. Our program includes support groups, networking groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs like this workshop. Educational programs are open to all. If you'd like to hear more about our services or join a community, please visit our website at cscsouthbay.org. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our workshop speaker. Dr. Natasha Nelson, DCMA, has been serving the South Bay community for 24 years. She's an experienced educator and wellness leader in integrative mind, nutrition, and somatic healing, providing whole body health and healing programs for all ages that support individuals, families, businesses, schools, and the community. You can find information about her at lifedoctor.guru. Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson, for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. Oh, it's so wonderful to be back. I can't believe we're already at module 5. Here we are. It's wonderful to see familiar faces and some new faces. So thank you for welcoming me and joining me today. Yes, I'm Dr. Natasha Nelson. And for those of you who may be your first time with me, just a little bit about me. I call myself Life Doctor because that's what they gave me that title and it sounded good. I'm a high performance educator and specialist, and I integrate the 5 pillars of health in business, in sports, and in life. And it's my mission to help people achieve their goals without compromising their health. And so if you've been with me before, nothing about me has changed. I'm a chiropractor by trade, and I have a master's in spiritual psychology because I understood that early on in my practice, I needed to get to really understand the mind-body connection and how it affects illness, injury, and disease. It's my daughter here in the middle, and it's the book that I wrote, Finding Courage to Let You Out. And I moved to the LA area from Northern California to pursue a beach volleyball career, which was a lot of fun. And I'm glad I did it and made no money, but who cares? I had a great time. And I'm here 24 years later. I stayed because I loved it so much. And so today we're going to finish up the series. If this is the first one that you are attending, all of the previous recording, they're all recorded and on my YouTube, and I'll get that at the end, or you can talk to Rebecca at any time and she'll get that for you. You're not going to feel totally lost if this is your first one. So make sure you stay. Don't feel like you need to leave, and it'll make sense for you too. So this is about when is it time to level up? People say that, oh, just level up, and it becomes part of the vocabulary, but oftentimes it's like, well, what really does that even mean? How do you know when it's time to level up, and how does that relate to mental health? And I start with this quote because it is so intense by Jan Van Zant, but it so perfectly summarizes everything, that until you heal the wounds of your past, you will continue to bleed. You can bandage the bleeding with food, with alcohol, with drugs, with work, with cigarettes, with sex, but eventually it will all ooze through and stain your life. You must find the strength to open the wounds, stick your hands inside, pull out the core of the pain that is holding you in the past, the memories, and make peace with them. I remember the first time I saw this, I had to read it many, many times and really digest it to understand the intensity of it, but also the realization of like, okay, there's hope that it's not just going to be stuck there. There's something on the other side. And what's on the other side? Because really got to get through of understanding how unresolved, repressed, and suppressed emotions drain our vital energy, because it leaves us emotionally numb or dead and disconnected from our body and others. But it's really where our health becomes compromised and how we become prone to injury and illness and disease is the amount of energy required to stuff emotions, to keep them down, to pretend everything is fine when it's not. That's what starts to compromise our health. So that's where we're going to go into how to shift and change that. So we touched on last week about how every emotion contains valuable information. And I hope for those of you who are here and who offered your email, I did send out the PDF of the emotion feeling words. So if you had wanted that and you didn't receive it, make sure you check your spam. And then if not, make sure you reach out to me and I can get that to you. But that every emotion contains valuable information. So much information that we are missing if we are ignoring or avoiding or disconnecting or distracting ourselves from emotions, especially those that are uncomfortable. Because I touched on it last week. I said, you know, it's fun to feel the good emotions like joy and love and, you know, fun and connection. We all love those. But it's the ones that are uncomfortable that we don't like, because oftentimes we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how to work through them. So we feel like, you know, we may have also been taught to get rid of them and they don't have any value and purpose, and which is inaccurate. Because what happens is, in order to hide them, in order to pretend like everything is fine, we end up finding coping behaviors to help us through. And not that they're wrong or bad, we needed them to survive at the time, but it's really understanding the depth of how those coping behaviors affect our bodies and our health. So one of the first things I do is really help understand, well, what is mental health? Because it's a big word that really means nothing because it has so many parts to it. So last week when I talked about the emotions, that's really the emotional health. And today's about the mental health. While they overlap, they are not the same. The emotional health is the process of dissecting emotions, understanding what we feel, making sense of the emotions, how to feel them, how to understand them, how to interpret them. Mental health is really the cognitive process. It's the practical application of the knowledge and the skills and the wisdom, our education, everything that the mind does, how we solve problems. Any problem, that's the mind, it's the mental, it's a logical, practical process. Whether it's conscious or not, there is a logical process to it, whether you see it or not. So it's understanding that why this can feel so confusing with emotional health, but it's so vital, because if we don't know which we're talking about and really understand which of the pillars, then it can be the treatment or how to solve it can be misconstrued. Like you can be working so hard on the mental health component, but if it's an emotional health issue, then it's not completely going to solve the problem. So this is where we get into, what if anytime an uncomfortable feeling emerged, instead of trying to run away and avoid it or distract it, you knew how to turn and face it and welcome it, knowing that it contained valuable information. So I'm already planting the seed to say, when something uncomfortable shows up, the mental health, that process is actually being willing to say, okay, let me lean in, let me feel it, let me logically figure out what it is and solve the problem. But what problem is it exactly? Well, that's what we're going to find out. So I started and I said, it's time to level up. Well, exactly what does that mean, leveling up? So the bottom line here is the goal line. And this can be anything from a goal that you have about your health and your body. It could be about relationships. It could be about money and finances. It can be career, any of those categories, any goal, big or small, doesn't matter. Anytime, this is kind of how life works, that we create a goal and we start the process of, here's our action steps, and we're going to take steps and we're going to, accomplish our goal, we get to a point where uncomfortable feelings are going to show up. And part of understanding is, well, why did it show up for us? Well, it's there to let us know that there is some skill or something that we need to learn or review or master. And so if the bottom line there is the goal line, going up there, the perpendicular line is the soul line. You can call it the inner growth line. I just like soul line and goal line because that's how I learned it, and it rhymes. So it's easy to remember. So I used examples from my timeline when I was leveling up. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the exact same. Each and every one of us has a different timeline, but the pieces tend to be very similar. We just tend to learn them at different times in our life. So for me, part of what I was learning when I was going through this process is really understanding anger. And I talked a lot about that in the previous episode. And what anger taught me was I needed to learn how to set boundaries. So understanding that anger shows up when we need to learn how to set boundaries. And you go, oh, okay. So that once you learn how to set the boundaries and how to get good at it and how to hold boundaries, all of a sudden you'll find that the anger doesn't become so intense and it doesn't stay with you. So you don't feel like you have to stuff it away. So then you look at the other emotions. These are the ones that we talked about last week, which is why I bring them up today, which is, okay, so jealousy and envy. One of the skills that you may need to learn, because it was one I had to learn, was learning how to not take things personally. And it's a skill. You're like, oh, not taking things personally. Some people know how to do that and some don't. Well, the beauty is it's a skill, so it can be learned. And there are many, many, many skills. I just chose some of the ones that I had to learn for myself. So if you start looking at this timeline, you can start to see, okay, if you have a goal line and you're working on something, let's say your health, you start to find that as you are in the healing journey, different emotions come up. When you start to dissect the emotion, you start to get to go to where you go, hey, there's a skill that if I knew how to do that thing, if I knew how to do it better, oh, then I wouldn't feel so uncomfortable. Oh, okay. Well, what's that skill? Okay. Boundaries, not taking things personally, how to speak up for yourself. Maybe it's about how to forgive. There's a whole host of skills. These are just the ones I use as examples on this chart. So before I move on, I want to make sure that this is making sense so far on the goal line, soul line, and how to plot the dots and what it means to level up. Because what those uncomfortable feelings are telling you is, hey, there's something that you need to learn or something that you need to get better at. So lean in, pay attention, and learn the skill and learn how to do it. So any questions on this part so far? No?
I don't
Okay.
see anything in the chat just yet. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. Because this is where mental health ties in. Because when the mind can't solve the problem, it develops the mental process to cope and function. And so if you had never seen that graph and you never understood that emotions are guiding you to a problem to solve with a skill, if you didn't know that, the mind is like, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. It'll find a way to cope. And it'll cope finding some type of unhealthy behavior, because that's how we deal with difficult life situations and circumstances or scenarios when we don't know how to get out of it. We don't know how to solve it. We don't know how to neutralize it. And so the mind just goes, okay, we'll find some way to cope. And that can lead to mental disorders, mental dysfunction. So when I'm working with clients and I'm working in the mental health space, I work in the realm of learning skill, the mental component of learning skills. Anything that's beyond that, then I refer out. I've got PhDs, I've got a bunch of people, I've got a whole team when it's actually the mental disorders and dysfunctions that are beyond that. So I say that because when the mind is trying to cope, oftentimes there can be some type of break, and that is beyond my scope, and I don't work with that. So I just wanted to make sure to be clear on my level of what I'm teaching tonight. I talked about this last week, that as a child, we learned to cope because if we didn't know what else to do, we had to figure out how to survive. And so we created unhealthy patterns, and that leads to the addictive behavior because that's how we soothed ourselves when we didn't know what else to do, when emotions were too intense and too uncomfortable, and there was no other way to feel soothed. We found a way to do it ourselves. And this can be, here's the list again, I had anything, whether it's something that's actually healthy or not, when the attention is used over and over in order to cope, then it becomes an addictive behavior and it becomes unhealthy. So exercise, which is fantastic, and we need to exercise and it's good for us. But there's a fine line where exercise being used to cope, so all of a sudden, an hour a day becomes 2, becomes 6. There's an unhealthy behavior quality because that's the mind's way of saying we got to find a way to cope. And so the addiction is any substance, action, behavior, person, place, or thing used with the intention to cope, distract, numb, avoid any uncomfortable feeling in current time. So the reason I say in current time with the addiction is I talked briefly about that dopamine hit, which is every time we take an action that gives us a pleasure center, it hits the dopamine, it makes us feel good, it lights us up, it feels good. So we keep doing it over and over. And that's the addiction loop. But why that matters is because when I talk about the mental health space, addiction is about what's happening in current time. Anxiety is about preemptively trying to solve future problems in order to avoid feeling pain. And so I give anxiety like the character of the Muppet Show because they're cute. And I don't want us to think about anxiety and all the voices in the head and all the things going on there as something wrong or bad. It's one of the ways we cope, which is we were taught, think about as children going, hey, make sure you're prepared for tomorrow. Make sure you plan for next week. Make sure you think about the schedule. Well, when we take that to an extreme, when there's something that has hurt us, our mind will say, well, let's start to preemptively try to think about all the things that can hurt us and anytime in the future and try to solve the problem now in order to avoid pain later. So then our mind goes, well, what are all the possible ways of any possible thing that could possibly hurt us? And then we start going and going and going. And then the mind just, it's not that it's out of control, but it doesn't know when to put limits. So then all the characters of all the pain and everything in our mind just starts to become so hyper vigilant and hyperactive that it becomes so aware and so sensitive to everything. And it's on high alert. And it becomes like the Muppets, where they all want to talk, they all want to be in charge, they all want to be heard at the same time. And so when you think about the Muppet characters, they're part of the characters. We need them. They're important, but we just can't let them be in charge and running the show. And especially when they're all trying to talk at the same time. But this is really about understanding how, when we feel anxious, how the mind tries to cope with trying to solve the problems. The reason that this becomes really an issue is we start trying to solve problems that don't even exist, but we make them up to try to solve something that's not even there. And the problem with that is oftentimes the solution to a problem is actually inherent in the problem itself. So we don't know what the solution is until the problem shows up. So they come as the package deal. So if we're trying to solve future problems that don't even exist, then our mind is going to get caught in the loop with no actual solution because we don't really know and have all the accurate information of what the actual problem is. Is that making sense? You're like, oh, okay, I'll come back to this, but I just wanted to start with that because remember, if addictions are about the current time and anxiety is about the future time, well, then depression is about the past. And what happens in the loop of depression, now remember, depression has a lot of layers, and I'm talking about one specific layer that I work with, not the ones with chemicals and deeper. This is the one part of the wheelhouse I work in. I work with the parts of depression where we are replaying past events of our life, wishing that we could have been better or stronger or smarter or somehow different, thinking that if we had known better or been smarter, we could have somehow changed what happened at the time. And so this is where the idea of, oh, hindsight, yeah, hindsight is great to help learn a lesson that we can help prevent something future happening. But life happens. And oftentimes we don't really see what happened until the event happened, until consequences or circumstances. Could be a day later, could be a decade later. But depression is, the challenge is we want to be able to look at our past, take the lesson and move it forward and use it. But depression is when we get stuck in the loop of replaying an event over and over and getting stuck in the, gosh, thinking that if I could have done it differently, then this would not have happened. And the pain that I experienced would not have happened. So it's really getting stuck, buying into the belief that if we were better, then we wouldn't have experienced the pain or caused the pain or been in that loop. So that's going to be how the cycle from anxiety from the future, depression of the past, and addiction in current time, how those loop together. Because most often what I found is that nobody really has just one. We kind of have all three on some level. And that we have to look at all three, because some days it might be, it's like 10% anxiety, 10% depression, 80% addiction. And then tomorrow it can totally shift and be different percentages. So it's always moving. And I say that so that on days when it feels like, well, what I normally do is not working, or the things that have worked yesterday aren't working today, sometimes this is why our feelings move. Why we feel what we feel shifts. So if you can understand what's capturing you emotionally, it can help you be in the right place to target how to deal with what's happening. And the thing about depression is that one of the easy ways of getting sucked in is, especially when we start playing the role of not only if we could have been better or stronger or whatever, smarter, but we start playing out the scenarios with different events, the different outcomes. It's like we live in this fantasy world, and then we start going off into a direction of, well, if I was smarter and better, and then the fantasy that I could have made a difference. And then we start almost like the game where you get to pick the ending. We get stuck in the past of replaying the scenario, but choosing a different ending. And so we can get stuck in that mind of, well, I like this ending better. Well, that one's so much more fun. That one was so much better, to get stuck in the fantasy. And so I say that because that's how all three relate and how we can get stuck in the traps. So I wanted to give it a moment here. It's a lot of information to follow to make sure that it's making sense. There are any questions so far? Everybody good? We'll come back. There'll be time for questions
Yes,
at the end.
nothing in the chat so far. Thank you.
Okay, great. So one of the things I like to talk about is if you avoid the conflict that you feel to keep the peace, you start a war inside yourself. That is, if you don't speak up, if you don't talk about it, if you avoid the conflict of what you feel, you start creating the disconnect where your head and your heart start to fight. They start a war, they start competing, they start confusing, but it's a conflict inside yourself that you start to feel that creates just so much more of anxiousness, depression, and any other feeling that will come up from it. And so that's the loop that when we get stuck in, we start to lose a lot of energy. And it's really understanding the energy, because we need the energy to function well, and especially how much energy requires in our body to heal, to process food, to everything. It's like we might as well use it the best we can with the most efficiency and limiting where the energy is draining out of our body. So these are some of the skills. You think about, having negotiating skills, communication skills, what's happening if you are just people pleasing to fit in. All of these things that start to happen on the mental level that are draining your energy. And when it starts to drain and drain and drain, then we start to get into cycles where it's burning out and complete depletion, which is how our body becomes compromised to illnesses and injury or disease when we get stuck in cycles of the unhealthy coping behavior patterns. Now, that's not the only way that compromises our body and health. It's just one of the ways. So when we look at integrating health, we got to look at all 5 pillars. Where's the energy draining? Where are the places we need to plug the holes of our energy draining to give our body just like the chance to heal, the chance to recover, the chance to just come alive? So this is where I want to be able to make it more interactive, because I want to hear from you. So if it's time to level up, and learn new skills, what are some of the new skills that you think, man, I really would like to learn how to do that, or I wish I understood it? Or is there something that you're like, I kind of understand it, I wish I was better at it? So that's what I want to go through, some of the most common skills that people have asked about. So how to set boundaries? Boundaries are about rules. Well, what rules do you want for your life? Do you want for you, and do you want how people treat you? That part requires you to actually have some clarity about what's important to you, your values. That's what's going to show up. So setting them is only part 1, and it's not really the hardest part. Part 2 is upholding the boundaries, because this is where it's how uncomfortable are you willing to feel when somebody breaks the rule and you have to have the consequences for that. Because there's no point of having boundaries if you're not willing to uphold them with consequences. And this is where it's like, oh, but I don't want to not talk to them. I don't want to, cut them out of my life. Well, that's an extreme. But if that's what's necessary, are you willing to do it? And it's like, nobody likes upholding the boundaries, but we all like the outcome of it. So that's why I bring that up. It's the outcome that we're looking for, but we got to feel uncomfortable to do it. Number 2, which is, the second kind of most frequently asked about skill, is how to not take things personally. Man, this one's a tough one, I know. So I love it. Yes, this is not a typo. It's the same question at the bottom. How uncomfortable are you willing to feel? Because not taking things personally is really understanding that when somebody doesn't like you for whatever reason, could be how you look, it could be what you said, it could be what you do. That's just it. They, the other person, doesn't like it. How to not take things personally means you have to like it. So the actions that you take, the behaviors that you do, how you live your life, they have to be things that are in alignment for you with your values, because you have to be willing to stand in them and stand on them. And sometimes if you have to stand there alone with everybody else likes it, you have to be willing to stand on it on your own. And it can feel really uncomfortable and really scary and really lonely. But when you are making decisions from your place of your values, it'll give you the strength and the courage to stand there, even when somebody else says, but I don't like it and I don't like you for it. You're willing to say, yeah, okay, but I like it and it matters to me. So back to how uncomfortable you're willing to feel. Yes, people will not like you, and be okay with letting them go. Or at least having a conversation with them first. You don't have to let them go without talking to them. Sometimes it's just sharing and opening up about why something is important to you, why it's a value to you. And oftentimes sharing that is enough to help reconnect and for people to understand. And the third skill is radical forgiveness. And I call it radical because, you know, the word forgiveness has a lot of layers, and we think about forgiving and forgiveness of others. The radical forgiveness is about the willingness to forgive ourselves. Being willing to get really deeply honest with ourselves and take deep accountability and ownership and responsibility for the things that we do, the things that we say, how we show up. And then realizing that whatever happens in that moment, we're doing the best that we can. But it's being willing to be so honest, to be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that I was doing that. And sometimes it's, I didn't even know that I believed that. And sometimes it really is, I just didn't know what else to do in that moment, at that time, with the information that I had. And so the radical forgiveness is the deep willingness to forgive ourselves for the things that we feel we should have done differently. So I'm going to morph into a little bit about how that connects with spiritual health, but I want to just talk about those few skills and let you think about it as if you have questions, bring it up, because I want to relate it to the next step of what that means and where you're going. So any questions about the skills,
I
at
have,
least those?
Doctor, I have a question. This is Rebecca.
Oh, yes.
Hi. So, I come from a dysfunctional family, and there is mental illness, anxiety, and depression. And so, I did a lot of self-help because I came from that environment and making myself healthy. But for me to interact with my family, I can't do it. They're not open to what I say, especially when I set boundaries. When something is said about me and I confront, I'm not afraid of that. It's all a denial. Oh no, you misunderstood it. Oh no, we didn't mean you. And it's kind of like I could see through that. And I let it go at that point because there's no sense in getting them to understand where I'm coming from. So I let it go, and then it piles up because it happens again.
Yeah. So So first, I want to acknowledge you for you doing your work, and especially in an environment where others may not be willing to do their work, and then still having to be in the family, in the environment, and in the scenarios. So one of the things, I'm going to use this example, and it's intentionally like not meant to put somebody down, but so that you can see the contrast, so that hopefully this analogy makes sense. As you are doing your work, think about you learning quantum physics. You're learning the language of quantum physics and, sending things to space and totally comfortable with that language. And you go home, and then family is still learning 1 + 1 is 2. Some of them might be learning, long division. And you're trying to have a conversation about quantum physics with people who are just in 1st or 2nd grade math. And I say it that way so that you don't look at them less than or different than, but just at a different level.
Right.
To help understand that sometimes you aren't going to be able to have the depth of conversations that you want, that you can only have conversations at the level that they are able to understand. And that means if it's very limited, then it's limited. And if you need to leave, then you leave. You don't stop loving them, but you're limited on how much time you can spend with them.
Yeah, because we never talk about the elephant in the room. Never.
Yeah. And if they're not able to, then you're not going to be able to.
Exactly.
So you can have conversations about the elephant in the room with yourself in your journals or with people that just to help find an outlet for you.
Yeah.
And I use this example so that you can see your family as just not less than, just limited.
That's a better way to look at it. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good. I'm glad that helps.
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat as well.
Okay.
What should I do if I realize that I had made a mistake? How do you forgive yourself?
I love this. This is my favorite thing in the whole world to work on. So the most important thing is recognizing the mistake. And by mistake, I am using air quotes because it's an opportunity to learn. That if you realize you made an error, what can you do to correct the error? So you start there. You start with acknowledging it. If there are other people involved, acknowledge it to them that you realize that you made an error. Acknowledging the error also includes acknowledging what you would do differently next time if you're in that same situation. And then the forgiveness piece, it really comes down to realizing that at the moment that you made the error, you didn't know what else to do. Now, make sure we're really clear, because sometimes even I hear people say, well, but you should have known what to do, or you knew what to do, you just didn't do it. Well, we have the part in the brain called the amygdala, which can get hijacked by our emotions and completely shut down our thinking and rational brain. So in the moment, that moment, even though you may have known a skill and how to handle a situation, if you got caught up in the amygdala emotional hijacking of your brain, it was not going to be able to logically process and think and go through a situation properly. So you forgive yourself for not knowing how to handle that exact moment and that exact situation, exactly how it happened. And then you learn and you say, oh, okay. And then you learn it and recognize it so that next time you're like, okay, I'll do better next time. Does that help?
Yes. There was
Good.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, I knew it was a chat. So, all right, I'm going to move on. We'll come back and just to make sure in the interest of time. So spiritual health is really about the connection to our authentic self, to others, and to something bigger. And why I bring this up now is really about our emotional health, our mental health is tied into our ability to show up authentically. Our self-expression, the deep sense of meaning and purpose and connection and fulfillment, all of that ties in. Because sometimes, and every time I read this quote, it makes me cry because I think about sometimes you have to make a decision that will hurt your heart and heal your soul. And it's a decision that hurts in the moment of, whether it's a people that we leave or a job that we need to leave or because we have to move or change of anything. It'll hurt, but it'll heal the soul for where we're going. And that's part of the lure of why I spent time on the graph with the dots, with the arrow of who you're becoming, because every emotion is calling you. It's the soul's calling you to say, hey, look here, there's something to learn, there's something to discover, there's a way to grow or evolve, which really ties into, well, it's more really about who are you becoming? Who are you becoming in the times that are challenging? Because that's the time we're going to grow. We don't grow when it's fun and easy and comfortable, but those are so nice to be in. I know. But it's the challenges that when we understand why we have them, it helps us get through them. And so I want you to think about, what if every part of your life story mattered? Everything that you went through and everything that you're going through now has a meaning. And every part of what you are experienced in the past and what you're experiencing now has a purpose. And so I think about my life, and this is the book that I wrote. I didn't know I was going to write a book, never thought about writing a book. But once I started plotting the graph of my life and looking at the lessons that I learned, skills that I learned, I realized who I was becoming. That's who I was becoming as a teacher, as a doctor, as a mother, like all of these things. That's how the book happened. So this is where I started with this graph, and I said, time to level up is, who are you becoming during this time of challenges that you're going through? All of the emotions that you feel that come up are guiding you to learn something, guiding you to level up, guiding you to become more of the authentic self that you are meant to become. And so I wanted to come back to making sure that if you need help with, how do you know what skill? How do you know what to do? Well, what is it that in the moment you would need to do or be or have that would help you in that moment? Oftentimes, that's the question that can help you go, oh yeah, if I knew this, or if I had that skill, oh, okay, then you can learn the skill. So that's my question. Who are you becoming? I want to hear from you. Your unique self. This is where I'm helping you get through those dots on the graph to find your unique gifts, your talents, your skills, all of that, your unique experiences, your knowledge. That is who you are becoming. And then ultimately, the feeling of freedom and peace is when you get to use all of that to be of service. When you're making a difference, able to contribute in whatever way that looks for you. You share your gifts, or you share who you are, what you have, how you are, where you've been. All of those bigger things is what helps you get through whatever it is you're going through right now, realizing, okay, there'll be a reason for that at the other side. So I put this as a reminder that if you are looking, because I'm going to open it up for questions, I want to hear from you, like what skills, what's something that you wish you knew how to do. But I also have a PDF that I will email to you if you're willing to put your email in the chat, because then Rebecca will send it to me, because it was easy last time to do it that way. Or you can email me directly. I will send you a PDF that has a list of skills. that can help jog the memory of like, oh yeah, that's a skill. I'd like to learn that. It can help prompt. So I want to open it up to and make this interactive to hear, are there any particular questions or skills or things that you're like, God, I wish I knew how to do that a little bit better? Things are popping up. So if it's your email, great. Rebecca, I know you'll get that to me in an email again. And then make sure for everybody, if you put your email in, I will email you by the end of the weekend. Make sure you check your spam folder because oftentimes that's where it ends up. So go in there and make sure to reply and answer and let me know that you received it. And anything else you would like some resources about, I'll be happy to share anything that I can. So any questions? This is where I'm going to end it. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm not done yet.
Hi.
It's one of my favorite songs. I love George Michael.
Oh.
And the song Freedom 90 is one that I'll just, every time I hear it. And there's one particular line that says, there's something deep inside of me. There's someone I forgot to be. And that's the whole journey that we are on as humans, as people going through challenges. This is it. Who are we becoming? So I also want to make sure to offer each and every one of you, thank you for being with me. Thank you for just your attention, your time, and I hope that what I had to share makes a difference for you. That I am willing to also offer you a health restoration coaching session. No obligation, no strings attached. Total yes, total no. It's totally fine. Send me your email or find me, and then we can set up a time. It's my gift to you. Like I said, no strings attached or anything. So now I think I'm done with my presentation. Oh yeah, no, one more. So this is me. This is my email, my website, my cell phone. You can text me. That's fine. The Unleash Your Life Force is my podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and then you can find my YouTube channel of the same name and my name with all of the recordings and a lot of other guests and information that I have. I'll put it up on YouTube. All right, now I'm done and we can answer questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. Wonderful. Heather, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to learn how to not snap back when someone is, aggravating me or snapping at me. There's something that happened years ago, but it never got resolved, and unfortunately, the relationship isn't good. But it's my uncle on my dad's side, and he was like a second father to me. I lived with him for a few years when I was going to college in Minnesota, and he moved to Hawaii. Nonetheless, for some reason, and he was like, come and visit me after you're done, with chemo and you're feeling well. So it was going to be obviously this amazing, relaxing vacation in Hawaii. Well, that's not what it ended up being. He decided he was going to take this opportunity to tell me why I shouldn't be vegan.
Okay.
And he wouldn't let it go. I mean, and I was there for, I can't even remember how long, but it was for sure over 2 weeks. It was a long time.
Okay.
Like maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month. And it was awful. Like I was crying so many times. Like, and I'm very, like I stick up for myself, and I'm one of the only ones, like he kind of does this to a lot of the family members where he goes at them. And I really do stand up for myself. So, but it's so bizarre.
And I hear you. So just in the interest of time, not because I'm trying to cut you off, but one of the keys to what you are describing is I want you to commit this to memory. It's one word: space. Sometimes it's physical space, sometimes it's emotional space, but sometimes it's the space between something being said and what being replied in return. There's got to be a space, there's got to be a pause. Reacting when we are triggered out of anger, and any emotion that's uncomfortable that can trigger, because we're trying to get the person to, the whole reason we lash out is we're trying to get the person to stop doing the thing or saying the thing that is triggering us, that is making us uncomfortable, that is making us upset. So we lash out, trying to push them away to make them stop. So there are two parts. One is, instead of reacting and lashing out to make them stop, I would say physically remove yourself from the conversation and just make the conversation stop. That's part one. Part two is, you're going to have to do the digging in there and get the resolution you need for what's triggering you without anybody else changing. Now that one's easier said than done, yes. But healing, there's always a root cause of a trauma, an emotional trauma. There's a root cause in there. And you're going to have to dig in there to find that splinter or that whatever and pull it out and allow it to heal. Because once you heal that, because I truly believe that our emotional triggers, those are our responsibility to deal with them, not anybody else's to stop us from being triggered. It's on us. So when we do the healing work to stop being triggered, then we don't really care what other people say. You're like, fine, have your beliefs, have your opinions. I don't really care. And you won't be triggered and you won't be bothered. So it's not something that changes necessarily overnight. However, it can, because I have seen in sessions with clients where you can get a healing when you dig and you understand it, boom, it'll happen just like that, where all of a sudden you just go, oh my God, I just totally get it. And I just don't really care to engage in the conversation. And sometimes it's amazing how once we do the healing work and we no longer feel the need to engage in the conversation, it's like that person knows somehow the unconscious connection. They stop talking about it. It's like they just somehow know that they are not going to bother you anymore and they stop. So if you can think about every time we're triggered as an opportunity to learn and grow, you'll find that it becomes easier to pull out the root. But sometimes you have to start with giving yourself space and a pause to allow yourself to not jump in and make it worse. So I hope that helped. And just in the interest of time, maybe if we have one more question, maybe two, but I want to make sure if there's somebody else that had a question.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was so helpful. I am
good.
just curious, when you say dig deep, to figure out what it has to do, why I'm lashing back out, does that mean like look into my childhood?
It can.
Like,
It
okay.
can. Did you attend in the part 4 that I did?
No, I didn't.
Okay. So I would encourage you, because I spoke specifically on anger and
Okay.
rage and the deeper meanings of that. So if you go back on the recordings, I think that if you hear what's the deeper meaning of anger and rage, I think that might help you.
Okay.
But if you're I am more than happy to, like I said, we can use a gift session and I can help you do that. Because sometimes it's childhood, oftentimes it's childhood. Sometimes
Yeah,
it's
that's
what
what I'm
happened last
thinking.
year. But yeah,
Yeah.
I can help you just get right to the point and dig it out pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're
Appreciate that.
so welcome. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
Wonderful. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, or you can unmute yourself and that'll signal to me that you have a question. I believe we have enough time for maybe one, possibly two. And while people are thinking, I just want to send a friendly reminder that this is the final part of the online series with Dr. Nelson. However, if you would like to join us again in person with the same topic, but in person, please go to our website and register for next Friday. It is a lunch and learn, so lunch will be served at 12:30 and the workshop will begin at 1.
Well, if there are no other questions, I just want to say thank you for attending. Thank you for sharing the honest questions. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for being here. And I'm here to support you in the way that I know how, which is helping with nutrition that we talked about in the first few episodes, and helping you just support you emotionally during the times, whether it's you personally, if you're going through something now, if you are in remission and still doing the healing work, wherever you are in the journey, I can support you in the way that I can. So feel free to email me and set up a session with me. And just stay connected though. Please absolutely stay connected, because I'd also like to hear from you what information or things you would like to know more about, because I'm in the process of having guests on my podcast, doing more different kind of classes. So I'd love to hear more about what would be helpful, because that helps me create programs for you. And then with Rebecca, because we'll be doing some more things together for you. So yes. Is there another
Thank-
question before we close it out though? No?
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Nelson, and for everyone for joining today.